and click on the Ask Ann Show if it's not already streaming for you. The station is supporting my show, and we need to make sure that we're supporting the station. And I thank you guys for tuning in via Facebook Live, those of you who are watching via live stream, and that's perfectly fine for you to do that. But I'm asking, before we get started tonight, if you're on your phones, if you're on your tablet, if you're on your desktop, laptop, if you would go to www.radio1117.com and tune into the Ask Ann Show. The first reason I'd like you to do it that way is because the last show, if you tuned in at 8 o'clock, you probably saw that you didn't see it on the Facebook Live stream. The show was going. At 8 o'clock, the show started on the station. So many of you had questions and didn't actually hear the intro, and I was able to join you in at the second half. We don't want that to continue to happen. So the radio station, right, we can control what happens on the radio station. So if you tune in via digital radio, radio1117.com, that won't happen because you won't lose the feed. We can't control what happens with Facebook and the Facebook Live stream, right? So we're thankful for the opportunity to be able to stream it live. But if you stay online and listen to the show, you'll get it from the beginning to the end. So that being said, thank you guys for joining. Thank you, Aaron, for joining tonight on the Ask Ann Show. We're making sure that the show is uninterrupted tonight and that you are watching my Facebook live stream, typing your questions, but also listening in on the radio show online. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you guys saw my post earlier today, I put a question and a topic for you. And before we go to the question, I want to make sure you have the dial-in number. And that number for you to dial into the show is 877-207-4899. Press 2 to be live on the Ask Ann Show with Tsunami. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about something a little different. Last week and week before, I believe we talked about entrepreneurship, starting your company, how to take the leap, not to have fear, and we covered a lot of different areas in the industry that you could tap into, and we gave you some really good resources. Tonight, I'm going to change the show up just a little bit. You saw the question that I posted. For you guys who are tuning in right now, I'm going to go ahead and read that question to you if you're not looking at my post right now. The topic is hitting the reset button. Okay? So the question for tonight is, what happens after that pivotal moment? After you have hit the reset button? Wow. Okay, so we're going to have hopefully a lot of dialect here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. Joe, I see you online. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to check in also, let us know where you're watching from, your city and state. Please check in with us. We'd like to shout out to you. Thank you for tuning into the show. So we're going to start it off. There's so many different areas we could talk about, but the show is 1 hour long. So we're going to go into some different areas tonight on how the reset button has to be hit sometimes, and what are your next steps? What are you doing after you've hit that reset button? And today on the Ask Ann Show, please call in with your questions. I'm happy to answer them for you. If you call the show and you're on live, trust me, don't be afraid. I'm not going to bite your head off. This is live entertainment. By no means am I going to yell, scream, or anybody going to bite your head off. So please call in. We want your questions. Or feel free to type your questions. And some of you are very comfortable with typing in your comments, so we welcome them however you want to proceed. So sometimes we've had to hit the reset button. And a lot of you may have had different experiences with that, right? In our lives, we sometimes have to start over. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. So if you're watching the show tonight, if you're listening to the show tonight, we're going to talk about some key areas where you hit the reset button, but there's some very crucial next steps that you have to take. And if you're not very careful, those steps can be very costly, right? So in some of the areas we're going to talk about tonight on the Ask Ann Show, thank you for tuning in. The first one is finances, because I think everybody watching and everyone listening can remember or relate to a point, whether it was in business or on your own personal life, that you've had to hit the reset button in your finances, right? For example, maybe you were someone who's been on your job for a long time, maybe, was invested, had kids, the family, the dog, the husband, and everything, and something happened, something life-altering happened, shattered your world, maybe a death in the family. It could be, I don't know, something, a natural disaster turned you upside down, and you maybe had to file bankruptcy, was something that was beyond your control. Okay, this may have even affected small business owners, right? Maybe you had someone in the household who lost their income. This is something that happens every day. Thank you for tuning into the show. Thank you so much for joining us with Ask and Talk Show. Maybe something just happened and you got behind and you could not catch up, and you decided, well, credit is the way. And you overextended yourself with credit and you just couldn't afford to make the payments, whether it was a mortgage, car payment, so have you. So you filed bankruptcy, right? So there's a couple of things that go along with that. Yes, you're filing bankruptcy. You're wiping the slate clean, right? When you wipe the slate clean, is that a temporary fix? Is that a long-term solution? It's something that's viable. These are the things we have to think about before we hit that reset button, because once you hit that reset button, you're starting it over. And then sometimes we have to remember, we have to be very mindful that there are no do-overs when you hit certain reset buttons. So we're going to talk about it tonight on the Ask and Talk Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host for this evening, Tsunami, coming to you live from radio1117.com, your station for hot hits, talk radio, and current events. If you're just joining us, we're going to cover some key areas in our lives that we've had to hit the reset button. First, we're going to talk about finances. I just gave an example on having to file bankruptcy or having to start over, having a spouse or someone in the family maybe lose a job. You've lost that income and some things happen. Maybe you fell behind in your payments, your mortgage, your car payments, or whatever it was. Maybe it was everything, and you had to start over, and you hit that reset button. So now you filed bankruptcy. This was a solution, or was it a solution? Thank you for tuning in online to the Ask Ann Show, Erin. I appreciate you. For those of you who are joining us via Facebook Live, we invite your questions and your comments, and I will try to get to them in the order that they're received. And we're not going to always talk about, for the previous shows, you saw we talked about owning a small business, running your company, starting the business, taking a leap of faith, and those things are very important. But this is the Ask and Talk Radio Show. We're going to talk about it all. There's one thing on this show, it's not going to be scripted. It's not going to be dictated. We're going to have a free flow of dialect here. So if you have a topic or you have something that you want to relate to or discuss, or maybe something going on the news, we don't really care. If it's important to you, it's important to us here on the Ask Ann Show. So please call in with your questions, or we're happy to take them right here in the Facebook live stream. So I'm going to do one more area. Thank you for tuning in from Biloxi, Mississippi. Thank you so much. So we're going to talk about the next phase of hitting the reset button. Maybe it was a job, right, that you had. Maybe you've been on your job for 5 years, maybe 5, 10 years on this one job. And something happened, right? And maybe the company didn't do well this year and they had to let you go. So now you're gone from that job. You know you need a paycheck. You need to support your family. What's your next step? You go and quickly get another job, right? In some of these cases, hitting the reset button isn't always up to us, right? Sometimes we're forced to hit the reset button due to situations beyond our control, and that's perfectly okay. In life, we'll all have to deal with that at some point. So let's just talk about it. What happens? What's your next move? So you lost that job. You've been there for about 5, 10 years. Now you've quickly taken another job. another company. Thank you for tuning in to the Ask Ann Show. Paul, I see you tuning in. Happy to have you. Now you're on job number 2 because you needed a quick solution. But was that a good, viable solution? Because we all need to generate income. Of course, we have bills. We have to pay bills and we have to live. We have to support our kids and our families. But at the same time, are we saying we just need to do something? Or are we being very mindful of what we're doing when we're doing it? The next thing I'm going to talk about, we talked about jobs, we talked about finances, we're going to talk about career. This one is a bit different because you have choices sometimes. Sometimes in your career, you don't have a choice. For example, let's use the oil company. Well, I won't talk about one particular oil company. Let's just talk about the oil and gas industry. You all know that there was a time period, and this has happened more than one time. So many of you watching, thank you for joining the show, Hedgeman. I see you tuning in from Louisiana. Happy to have you on the show. And we're asking that you not only tune in via Facebook live stream, that you would go to www.radio1117.com and tune into the show. That way it's an uninterrupted stream. Facebook can control what you're seeing here on the live stream, but if you tune in on the station, you're bringing traffic to the station and they're supporting the show, and I'd like for you to support the station. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we're going to talk about that career. Now, that may not be up to us all the time, right, ladies and gentlemen, because you know, in the oil industry, oil and gas industry, you know, 1 year profits through the roof. The next year, they're cutting 10,000 jobs, just like that. It happens. We see it on the news. We have friends and family members that are affected by it. This is real life. What happens, though, when it's you and you no longer have this career because you've done this your whole entire life and this is all you've done? So now it's not just about finding another job, right? You have an industry that's not hiring anymore, right? You have a centralized occupation. Maybe you're too old in some of these employees' eyes. And I'm not saying that you should worry about that, but I'm talking to you tonight about things that actually happen. You know, I've had people come to me and say, I'm too old. They won't hire me because they're worried I'm going to retire, or they're worried I'm too old, and or I'm going to get sick and I'm going to be at risk. And just, you'd be surprised of all the things you hear. Or they'll say they don't want to pay because I have so much experience. They want to bring in someone younger that can do what I do better than what I do. So all of these things we have to contend with. So what happens when you hit that reset button? You know, sometimes we have to think about our next move. That pivotal moment. What is your next step? Because I think we've all had to touch on this at one point. If it wasn't us personally, maybe it was our parents. Maybe we grew up in the household where we had a two-person income for the family, and mom and dad worked for 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden, maybe dad manufactured cars his whole life, and now they don't do it in that town anymore. They don't have the job anymore. Now, mom's the only one working. Mom never really supported the family. Mom was the helper in the family. So maybe you've experienced it from the inside. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was your colleague. It's touched each of us. So these are things that we all have to contend with at some point in our lives. So we want to talk about what happens. What is your next step? Maybe it was in your faith. Those of you tuning in tonight, thank you for tuning in. Makishi, Kay Makishi, thank you for tuning into the Ask Ann radio show. We're happy to have you. Maybe it was your faith. Maybe it was the career. Maybe it was that job. Probably the finances. That's something that we can all talk about. What is your next step? How do you go from there? Because we have to know how to hit the reset button. There's a proper way to hit the reset button. And I'm going to stop before I get to the last area that we probably had to hit the reset button on. And I'm going to talk about what actually happens, right? How many IT people we got watching or listening to the show. And if you're watching via Facebook live stream, you're going to hear me periodically announce that I'd like for you guys to just stop for a moment and go to your phones. If you have your mobile phones or your iPad or your desktop, laptop, I'd like for you to go to www.radio1117.com. That way you're tuning in through the radio station and your feed won't be interrupted through Facebook Live, which is very possible because, as I mentioned last week, we were on at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, but for whatever reason, the Facebook Live stream was not going. So if you go on directly to the station and listen to the show and tune into the show, you not only get an uninterrupted feed, you also support the station who's supporting the Ask Ann show. Thank you very much for tuning in. I see you, Linda, tuning in. I see you, Leanne, tuning in. Thank you for being on the show with us tonight. Please feel free again to call in with your questions. You're free to comment here or post your questions via Facebook Live feed, and that's okay. But please don't be afraid to call into the show. When you call in with your question, you'll be on the line live with me. And if it gets uncomfortable, you don't have to stay on the call. You can ask your question and just hang up the phone. So we're going to go back to our topic for tonight. How do you hit the reset button? What happens when you hit the reset button? And what's your next move? It's not just one step, right? Because you and I know if you're not an IT person, everybody in here has a laptop or had a laptop or a computer at some point in their lives, even their cell phones. We've had to reset it, right? What happens when we reset that device? Because we all know it's not just a pain, but it's a process. It's a big deal. And we don't just go around saying, yo, you know what, I'm on my laptop, I'm just going to reset it. You know, we don't pull out our phones and go, yeah, it's just time, I'm going to do a full reset on my mobile phone. If anything, we do everything in our power to not have to reset it, right? So we want to think about the process. Thank you for joining the show, Minister Bartney, for tuning in from North Carolina. Happy to have you on the Ask Ann Talk Show. So when you hit the reset button, it's a process. It's a very detailed process. Now, we don't see what happens when we hit the reset button on these devices. It's impossible for us to see what's going on. What we do know is wiping everything clean. Once you hit the reset button, everything is erased. It's all gone. Everything is gone. All the data, all your contacts, your phone numbers. Now, if you were smart before you hit the reset button, you backed everything up. That's what we do these days, right? We want to make sure that the important stuff is protected. Those important phone numbers, contacts. Maybe we had some text messages with some really good information in there that we needed for reference material. Or, you know, we had some favorites there. We save everything. We make a copy of it or we sync it. If we're smart. A lot of times, though, we're talking about being forced to have to reset. Now, this is what I want you to think about tonight. You don't always get an opportunity to think before you have to hit the reset button. If this laptop crashes, there's nothing I can do about that, right? That's beyond my control. If your industry just decides it's going to lay off 1,000 people and you happen to be one of the companies and in the department that's affected, that's out of your control. There's nothing you can do about that. Absolutely nothing. If you're married and you know you've been working for 10, 15 years and something happens and you lose your job because the company's downsizing. It's just not profitable for them right now to keep you with all the technology. They want to put a machine in place of what you do. This happens. This stuff happens every day. So sometimes we're forced to have to reset, whether it is your job, whether it is your career, regardless of finances, we have to start over. But the very next steps are very crucial. We talked about faith. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Maybe, you know, you had a hard walk. You were very trusting and you maybe belonged to a ministry or a church and some things happened that weren't supposed to happen, right? We're in the real world. You know, we see every day on the news, unfortunate things do happen. You know, there's always a bad apple sometimes in the barrel. There's nothing we can do about that. But if this has happened to you, not by choice, you had to start over. So what do you do now? You can't go to this church anymore because maybe this pastor's in jail. This is nothing factual. I'm saying that these things affect us, you and I, daily. Maybe the church did something that they weren't supposed to do, maybe with the money. Maybe you went to church Sunday morning and the doors were closed because they couldn't afford the rent. I mean, it's a business. They have to be able to pay the rent. Maybe they didn't get enough donations that year and they just couldn't renew the lease. So many things can happen, and you have to hit the reset button. You just go to any church. You just say, oh, I'm not going anymore. I'm done with that. I went to church. I went every week, and now the door's closed. I'm never going back. I mean, what do? Because this happens in everyday life. Having to start over. No? There's some very important steps that you have to take. You have to be very careful. Some things are out of our control, but some things are. And it's how we react to having to hit that reset button. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into the Ask and Talk Radio show. For those of you who are just joining us, we'd like for you to browse over to www.radio1117.com. And we'd like for you to join the show via the station. And if you're watching via Facebook live stream, that's perfectly okay. But we'd like for you to tune in to the broadcast on the station because they're supporting the Ask and Talk Radio show. So if you would do that, you show your support not only for the radio station, but you show your support for me, Tsunami, your host for this evening. So again, I am taking calls, and I don't want you guys to be afraid to call in. I see that many of you want to put your comments on Facebook and ask your questions here. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm happy to have you on the show. I don't prefer one way or the other, but if you do call in, I promise I'll be gentle, I'll be very polite. We talk about everything, but there is a decorum. So I'm going to talk about one of the last areas, and there are many, many, many different areas that we have to stop, start over, and sometimes hit the reset button. We talked about finances, maybe having to file bankruptcy, maybe you lost a job. We talked about jobs, that company closed its doors. You have to take the next best thing, which is really not the best thing, but you need money, so you do whatever it is you need to do. This happens every day. I don't care what city you live in. I don't care what state you're in. This is real life. This is reality. If you haven't faced it, keep living. I promise you, you're going to know someone who does have to face this. And we talked about maybe having to hit the reset button with our faith. I mean, now that's, it's kind of rare to have to do that, but it does happen. Again, you never know. Your ministry may die out. You may have a pastor that, caught doing something, maybe taking the money, going on cruises and buying yachts and airplanes or whatever. We have so many different areas in our lives that we may have to stop and hit the reset button on. And we just mentioned a few minutes ago that we have to be prepared before we hit the reset button so that we're not devastated, but we don't always get the opportunity to do that. We don't always get the opportunity to be prepared before that happens. So if we can prepare. That's key, right? If you can prepare, do that. That's key. But if you can't, if you faced a hurricane, maybe you had to evacuate. Again, maybe the industry unfolded. Maybe you were an oil and gas administrator and whatever happened to the company, you were overpaid and no other company will pay you what you were making at this company. So now you're starting over in your career. Again, you lost your job. Maybe you're having to take the next best thing and it's really not. And you're forced to do some things you don't really want to do because you're having to hit the reset button. What are you doing in that pivotal moment when you have to hit the reset button? I'm hoping that preparation is the very first thing you think about before you have to hit the reset button. Because believe me when I tell you, you can have devastating results if you do not prepare. So before you wipe that laptop, before you reset that cell phone, before you wiped it clean, you backed up your material, you saved the numbers, made sure the contacts were there, you made sure you had everything on the phone, pictures, photos, whatever it is that is dear and near to you, you make sure you take care of that, right? Thank you for tuning into the Ask and Talk Radio show. Thank you, Pat, for joining. Thank you, William, for joining us tonight. So it's very important to make sure that the information, the data we need is protected before we hit the reset button. But in those cases, they're not so rare that you don't have the opportunity to stop and back up your data or make preparations, and you're kind of thrust into a situation that you never thought you would find yourself in, the very next steps that you take are very crucial. Why? Before I answer the why, I have to bring up one more example. But we talked about finances, talked about job, careers, faith, but we didn't talk about relationships. Now, if you've not been affected by your job cutback, if you've not had to change careers in your life, if you've not had an issue with your church, something going on there in ministry, or your finances haven't been touched, I'm almost certain, I can't guarantee it, you've had to start over in a relationship. Many of us, and I said us. As a matter of fact, more so than would like to admit it. So before we go any further, I'd like to ask, what do you think your next step should be after you've had to hit the reset button? For those of you watching, take a moment to think about that. I'd like to see comments. I'd like to see the answer to that question. I am watching you tune in. Thank you so much for joining us at the Ask and Talk radio show. If you prefer, you can call in. That number is 877-207-4899. And you select number 2 to join in and be live on the air with Tsunami. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments to put your question there or your answer to my question. What is your next step after you hit the reset button? What is the most important thing to you to do? There are no right or wrong answers, so please, by no means, don't think that you're going to say the wrong thing because this is a test. We're talking about it. This is the Ask and Show. We're going to talk about everything. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. So before I give you my answer, I'm going to go through a few things that will touch on all of those areas that we mentioned just a moment ago. The finances with your career change, industry, your faith, your relationship, finances. I want you to be very, very careful before you hit the reset button on your own, right? And I'm saying that, and I'm very serious about it, because whether you're in business for yourself, whether you are not in business for yourself, whether you work on a job from 9 to 5, whether you had $1 million invested or whether you lost $500 in your investment, whether your job was 6 figures or whether you barely made minimum wage, it really doesn't matter. But what does matter is your reaction and your next step. Right? Thank you so much, William. I appreciate the comments. Thank you for tuning in. I want to implore you guys to hit the reset button very carefully, very cautiously, because your life can very well depend on that. Okay? Because sometimes we do not get a do-over. Sometimes we're fortunate enough and blessed enough to get a do-over, but sometimes we don't get a do-over, and the do-over can very well be the reset button. You know, for many people, devastation brings about change and having to reset and start over. It's not optional. It's not what they wanted, but it's the hand that they were dealt. Right? If you make the wrong choices first to reset, that's a major choice if you're choosing. We're not talking about the ones who did not have a choice in the situation. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the ones who make the decision to hit the reset button. If you don't do so very, very cautiously and very carefully, it can be very costly to you. Now, I'm not talking about just financially, right? Because what we do now in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? We're going to feel that. You know, and I'll give you some examples here in just a moment, but I want to outline how you should handle having to hit the reset button. Okay? Do so very carefully and cautiously, because if not, it could be very detrimental. It can affect you, your family, your children, your job, those around you, your neighbors, your organization. It's a trickle effect, because what you do, it doesn't just affect you, right? It may have been something that happened to you, and as a result, now you're having to readjust your entire life. But the way you make your adjustments, it won't just affect just you, because there's others around you. There's others that network with you. There's others that trust you. There's others that work with you and depend on you. And what you do is going to make a difference, whether you like it or not. And I'm not trying to put pressure on anyone, but I'm just wanting to make you think. I want you guys to talk about this. This is real life. This stuff is happening every day. All right. Decisions you make may not be just costly, but it may be a lifelong decision. Because sometimes we don't get a do-over. Thank you for tuning in from Seattle, Washington. I see you on the show. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us tonight. I'm happy to have you. So, because we know that we can't just hit the reset button, just do it out the clear blue, and that it won't have any consequences, that no one will be affected, that changes won't be made, we should do so knowing that I am responsible for every single thing that happens after I hit this button, after I start over. Okay? Because sometimes we think the decisions we make only apply to us. They only affect us, but that's not true. It's just not in the real world. It doesn't happen that way. You'd have to be a hermit living on an island by yourself. And even if you were, it's going to affect the crab and the fish in the sea and the trees and coconuts that's hanging. Okay, let's just be real. There's nothing that we can do in our lives that's not going to affect someone next to us, around us, and in our presence, or we work with, we love. So these things are very important. So we talked about having the option to reset. And before doing so, saving those things of value, making sure you protect everything you possibly can, because after you reset, you wiped everything clean and now you're starting over. So we're going to go back to what we talked about in the beginning of the show. Thank you for tuning in to the Ask and Talk Radio Show. I am your host for this evening, Tsunami, coming to you live from radio 111117.com. If you are not tuning in through the station, I ask that you would stop and go to your laptop, your iPad, your phone, whatever device you have, and that you would tune in directly to the station so that you support them and that they would support the show as well. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning. We talked about a situation with our finances, and we were brought into this hurricane swirl, tornado, if you will, and whatever happened, it snowballed so bigger than us, and the debt was over our eyeballs, and we just couldn't go any further. And now you had to file bankruptcy because you think it's a viable solution. So you hit that reset button. Now, did it answer the problem? Yeah, I guess it did. Did you wipe the slate clean? Yes, you did. Because what did you do? Well, you filed bankruptcy, so you wiped out your debt. Great. And what about your credit? Because we can't do anything these days without credit unless you have stacks of cash just sitting around, hanging around. You really can't operate without credit, without good credit. As a matter of fact, I want to say there's two different things. There's credit and then there's good credit. So now, because the situation was out of control and you felt you had no other choice, you had to hit the reset button. You did that. You wiped the slate clean. You filed bankruptcy. Now you don't have the debt anymore. You can breathe a little bit, but can you? Because we're going to assume if you're filing bankruptcy, there's not a whole lot of cash there, because if there were, then you would have been able to pay those bills and you wouldn't have had all that debt. So now one decision to fix an issue and a problem gave you maybe a short-term solution, or was it? Maybe you're a small business owner and you had to file bankruptcy. That may actually help you because it's different. Because what we do in our personal lives and we do in our professional lives may be a little different. You're doing the same thing, but it may have a different effect. So you have to really think about hitting the reset button. And when you do that, you have to be very mindful of the outcome, because there are crucial moments and times after making those decisions that you can't go back and undo it. And these are the things that I want you to think about tonight on the Ask and Talk radio show. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in. We're talking about what happens after you hit the reset button. What do you do? What's your next step? What do you do in that pivotal moment after you've hit the reset button? This is not a laptop, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about your cell phone. I use those as examples. But what I'm talking about is after you make a life-altering life change, a decision to do something completely different from that what you were doing, and you hit that reset button, you're not going back because you reset it. And you know, and I know, what I'm talking about means a complete do-over. I want you to think about that. I want to talk to you about that tonight. Very important things, because every decision we make, it's going to affect someone around us. It's no way to get away from that. Okay? And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you own the company. I don't care if you're the custodian that cleans the company. That does not matter. I don't care how much money you're spending, saving, investing. It does not matter. I don't care if you're an entertainer. It does not matter to me whether you're a teacher. Your decision is going to affect someone around you. You can bank on that. You say, well, you know, I made some life-changing decisions. I've hit the reset button quite a few times, and I made it okay. That's a good story. I like to hear about it. I like the details. I like to hear the details of that. But again, everybody doesn't always get the opportunity to choose. Sometimes it's not a choice. You know, sometimes we're forced to hit that reset button. Now you're in a new career. You're in oil and gas for 30 years, and now you have to start over. You're not making what you made before. You're having to take a demotion. You're having to work for someone half your age. You don't have seniority. It's not by choice, right? Thank you so much for tuning into the Ask Dan radio show. I see you watching from the Woodlands, Texas. We're happy to have you. What about in your faith that we talked about? And this does happen. I mean, it may be a rarity. It may not be as popular as having to start over with your finances, your job, your career, and relationships. But what about your faith? What happens if you worshiped with this ministry for 20 years, and then you turn on the news one day, your pastor's on the news, and you know something's happened, he's had to step down, and the church is in turmoil, and find out he got corporate jets here, and buildings over here, and mistresses over here, and the church was sending money and just doing all kinds of these things. Really do happen. What happens when you have to hit the reset button? For those believers out there, this is a very important issue, because it can very well happen. I've seen it happen time and time again. Growing up, I watched, the TV evangelist on the news, running with my father. That was one of the things he loved to do all the time. So I'd go in the room, he'd be sitting down, and he'd have the tears flowing, and he's watching this, what is it, TV in, or what have you. And, 2 months later, month or two later, I pick up the newspaper, and I can read, Daddy, wasn't this the pastor that was on TV crying with you last week? What's going on? And so he had to explain these hard things to me, but these are real life situations. This stuff happens every day. Again, if you have the option, before starting over and hitting the reset button, I'm going to give you just a little piece of advice, and whether you take it or not, completely up to you, but just know that I'm not just talking to be talking. If I'm telling you something, believe me, I'm speaking from experience. Do so very carefully, because it's not a good feeling to step into a room of people that look at you like, who are you? What are you doing here? You started over, you lost your job, so you take any job. You didn't even think about it. You didn't do the research. You just know you needed money, so you got to go work somewhere, so you just go and work there. You're overqualified. You have a degree. Everyone else in there is maybe in high school. They're looking around like, what is she doing here? What is he doing in here? Are they the new manager? Are they the new boss? And you feel out of place. I mean, I'm not telling you to not do what you need to do to support your family, but I'm telling you to think about the decisions you make before you make them. Because whether or not you're starting over, you always have a choice. Okay? That is what I need you to understand. I don't care whether you lost a job, whether the industry unfolded and you couldn't stay in it anymore. I don't care if you went to the church door on Sunday morning, you knocked and no one answered the door. You know, understand it happened to you. It was not your fault, or whether you chose to reset. The next step that you choose very carefully, you have the choice to choose. Right? It's completely up to you how you proceed. Because if you're not careful, those decisions that you make right then and there, they're going to affect you for the rest of your life. That's just how it's going to work. It can affect you in a good way, right? May not be such a good way. It may not have the type of ending that you thought you were going to have because you didn't think about it, you didn't reflect on it, and you didn't sit down and take a moment, pray, and think before you took the next step. You know, a lot of times, and I've been guilty of it, I'm guilty of it a lot. You know, we act a little irrational. We don't mean to, but depending on the situation that we're in, at the time, you don't know how you're going to react. So we let our emotions take over, right? And what happens? Once your emotions take over, you're not thinking straight. You're not thinking clearly. Your reactions aren't thought out. They're not planned. And so now we're making choices in an emotional state of mind that we're going to have to contend with for years, maybe months, weeks to come. Right? So for you to think about tonight on the Ask Andrea show. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. Tsunami, your host for this evening. And I would love to take your call and your question if you would call in. And I think that you guys are still a little bit afraid to do so, and that's okay. We're only in the second week of the Ask and Talk radio show, but there's going to be a time where I'm going to want this phone to ring and I'm going to want to hear your comments. But right now, typing them, that works just fine for me. Thank you for tuning in, John Stacy. I see you on. Thank you so much, Mark Frederick, tuning in from Louisiana. Thank you for watching the show. If you guys have not already, I'm asking that you would go directly to the station tonight. I'm going to keep repeating this throughout the broadcast because I need to get you guys to tune in to us on the station. And it's okay to watch via Facebook live stream. Thank you for doing that. You're perfectly welcome to stay tuned in via Facebook live stream. But I would also ask that you would go over to www.radio1117.com and that you would join the show and listen in on the station. The station does get ratings, and the more people that tune in, the higher the ratings, especially during the Ask and Talk radio show. So if you support me, it's supporting the show, vice versa. I would really, really thank you for doing so. Thank you for joining us tonight. Okay, so I'm going to get ready to close out in just a moment, but I'd like to know how many of you have had to hit the reset button. If you are on your devices, I'd like to see if you would share that. Now, you don't have to go deep. You don't have to give us your personal information, nor do I want you to have to say what happened, but I just want a yes or no here. How many of you are want to share if you've ever had to hit the reset button by choice or if you were forced to hit it? Deanne, I see your comment. Thank you. Self-reflection and refocus on your goal. Very good. I'm going to pin that comment because I like what she said here. And I'm going to say, Leanne, that was in response to my question when I asked, what is your next step? What do you do? If I'm correct, I think you were answering that question. If you were, you can chime in here. But yes, self-reflection and refocusing on our goals, very important. You know, actually that's key. And the reason why is because it helps you to keep sight of what's important. As we talked about a second ago, how when we're thrown in these situations out of the clear blue, you know, very unexpectedly, we weren't looking for anything devastating to happen. But once it happens, it throws us in an emotional state of mind, right? You know, I don't want to say women in general because people want to say I'm grouping all women in one group, and that's not what I'm doing. But I personally know I'm very emotional, as are many of my friends, right? Very emotional. And I know some men who are very emotional. So it's not just a gender thing. But what happens when you operate in a state of emotional state, you're not thinking clearly because you're feeling some type of way. You're really angry, right? If you're not angry, maybe you're hurt. Maybe your heart is broken. Or maybe if you're not angry and your heart is broken, you're confused or you're sad or some type of emotion that makes you not think clearly. So if you can't really focus on your goal, then you can come back, concentrate, and get back to what you really need to do after hitting the reset button. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to start talking to you about the result of your choices. As a result of your choices that you make after you hit the reset button and you wipe the slate clean and you start all over, if you have not really thought about your next steps, the decisions you make may affect your children, your family, your colleagues, your friends, your businesses. If you're getting ready to start a business, it may affect groups of people around you. Maybe you serve on a board, maybe you're a council member, and now everybody's backing away. We really need to think about where we are in our lives when we hit the reset button and how many people are hanging in the balance there, because if we're not careful, we don't just lose because of the situation we've been in, but when you start to lose friendships and relationships and business connections and colleagues walk away and everybody that was supporting you, cheering you on in your circle, connected to you, maybe looked up to you, it starts to diminish if you don't carefully choose and choose the proper step to take. I see a couple more comments coming in. I had to hit a very hard reset, very scary, but absolutely necessary. No growth without it. Very good. Thank you so much for your comment, LaDonna. I think a lot of us have done that, and that's why we're talking about it tonight on the Ask and Talk radio show. This topic was so deep, I had to cut down my examples because it touches on so many different areas in our lives. Having to start over and hit that reset button. If I would not have narrowed this list down, this show tonight could be 2 to 3 hours long, easy. Just going through different areas and times in our lives where we've had to start and stop again, or stop and start again, hit the reset button and wipe the slate clean, whether it was something that we chose to do or beyond our control. It's a very serious situation, and it can have some seriously devastating results. Another comment, I have more than once. I'm assuming he means he's hit the reset button more than once. One time was forced, and another time was by choice. Thank you for your comment, Joe Bowen. Both times required a plan. Very good. So then I do have a question about that comment, because we talked about being forced to do it when it's a situation beyond our control, and the other one when it's optional, when you choose to start over. Your comment is both times, and I'm assuming you mean by choice and not by choice, that it required a plan. So may I ask if you would come back and elaborate on that just a little bit, if you can, if we have time in the show. We've got about 8 minutes left in the show. How did it require a plan if it was not by choice, if it took you by storm and you were not prepared for it? Because sometimes that's exactly what happens in life. And I used the example earlier, if this laptop were to crash, it's kind of hard to be prepared because I'm in the middle of a show and I'm actually using this device. So I guess technically I can prepare and have a backup PC sitting right here, powered on and ready to go, but it would still be an interruption, right? It would still be a hiccup. I would still have to stop the show for a moment, and I'd have to take a break, stop, restart, and regroup, right? So I don't know how I could actually prepare for that. We could talk about it and make plans as a just in case, and that's very good to do, but we don't always get that opportunity. Very, very good comment. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Ask and Talk Radio Show. I'm your host for this evening, Tsunami, coming to you live from radio1117.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, not only on Facebook live stream, but you're tuning into the digital station so that you can support them as they support the Ask and Talk Radio Show. So I've gone through a few comments here. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're commenting, you're welcome to keep commenting. I want to see your thoughts. I want to hear what you think about the situation, because it could be very serious. Leanne commented earlier that self-reflection is important and refocusing on our goal was important. And I do agree with that, because it will take you out of that emotional mindset and bring back on track and get you going again. That is key. What about relationship side? We talked a little bit about examples in all the other areas, but I really believe that if you have not been touched by resetting your finances, maybe in your jobs, your career yet, and you've been very blessed to not have to have done any of that, and you've just had a smooth ride, that's wonderful. And that's very far and few in between. But maybe you have had to reset in a relationship. Maybe you were married for a very long time. Maybe you were single and deemed yourself a person that was going to be single for forever, right? And you were never, ever going to join the marriage life. Maybe you dated someone for about 5 years, and you were committed to a relationship and you were making plans and setting for a house, and you guys were going to get married and everything was going the way you thought it was supposed to go. And maybe in every single one of these situations, something happened that was beyond your control and the reset button was hit. What do you do? What is your next step? These things are very real. No one wants to wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, my life is in turmoil. I have to start completely over. No one thinks about that. Sometimes we get an opportunity to look up the road and kind of see how things are going. And kind of maybe, you can say, oh, wait a minute, I may have to rethink this. And you may get an opportunity to evaluate or reevaluate in a relationship, right? Maybe. But maybe someone just walked out, just decided it wasn't for them anymore, and they just left. No warning, nothing. Just got up and left. Death of a spouse. Very good example. I was going to actually talk about that. Again, these are situations beyond our control. These are things that we hope and pray we never have to touch. But the hard reality is there are times in our lives where we're going to all have to face all of these things, and we're going to have to start over. So I want to leave you with just a couple of things, your questions and your comments. Thank you for tuning in to the Ask and Talk Radio Show. We're at the end of the show, and I'm getting ready to close us out, but we talked about different areas where being able to start over the right way after having hit the reset button is crucial. If you restart the right way, you can maintain your life. You can come through victorious if you plan it, if you have time to plan it. Step one, put it in God's hands. Very important. Sometimes you have to adapt to the situation all the time. I'm just going to read a few more comments and then I'll get back to my closing. Again, yes, Aaron, I see you posted death of a spouse. These things propel us into a situation where the reset button is going to be hit. There's nothing we can do about it all the time. Sometimes it's in our control, sometimes it's not. But if you pray about everything, as Joe said just a moment ago, put it in God's hands. And we pray about it first and foremost. That's very important. If you can, as I pinned the comments earlier, refocus on your goal. You know, we're all emotional creatures. We're going to have things that happen. And I didn't mean for this to be a sad and melancholy show, talking about very real life situations that you and I all face. You know, unfortunately, we have to live this life, and it's not always going to be a joyous occasion. Some things are going to happen, but it's how we proceed after it happens. If we keep that in mind and we hit that reset button, just like with the laptop, the example we gave about the cell phones, the devices being reset, if you backed it up, if you stored those contacts, if you made preparations, go ahead and hit the reset button. Now, in doing so, you still may affect those around you, whether you're in business, whether you're not, whether you're a mom, you know, whether you were married, divorced, whatever. That decision may still affect those around you, but you're prepared. You've backed everything up. You have a plan. You put something in place. And when you put that something in place, you can move forward just a little more comfortably, knowing that you can see the end. Now, for those of you like myself, who several times have had to hit the reset button, situations beyond my control, whether it's my career, every single thing I mentioned to you earlier, it was all me. The finances, job, career, faith, relationship, all me. So I can talk to you about these things and share these things. I didn't say that to the end purposely. I really wasn't going to say it, but it was all me. And I can tell you that how you proceed is very vital to how successful you're going to be. Don't lose sight of God. Always pray. Never forget that. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care if you're Baptist, Pentecostal, Lutheran, Catholic. That does not matter. Let your faith be your guide, but always try to have a plan in place. We cannot change the unforeseen, but we can change how we respond to everything. You know, may not always be the easiest thing to do, but you have the ability to change your outcome. Thank you so much for tuning into the Ask and Talk Radio show. I was your host for this evening, Tsunami. I hope you will join us on next Monday, 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. Please join us by going to www.radio1117.com, your station for talk, hot hits, and current events. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye. Good night. So very young and so brave, but shoes upon